Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm head of content and research. My guest today is John Adams from Spark Therapeutics. We're going to be having a conversation about computer software assurance, what's new in the space, why are we talking about it at all? I think it's something that is top of mind for a lot of people, and for people who are wondering why, this is going to be a relevant conversation. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Why don't we start off by talking about CSA in the context of, this is something that we should have been doing all along, but it's being brought up a lot right now. Right. Where are we in the landscape? Walk us through it.
Well, CSA, and I'll just use that as just an acronym because it's a mouthful, right? Computer Software Assurance. CSA became a topic of conversation somewhere around the start of COVID, and I don't know if that was just happenstance or coincidence, but it became a conversation like, oh, this is a new thing that the life sciences regulated pharmaceutical companies, we need to focus on being risk-based, and we need to do computer software assurance. Now, I have been doing computer systems validation, or CSV. I've been doing that for decades, right? And it's something that is a regulatory requirement. We have to demonstrate that our computer systems that are part of the manufacturing process, or directly or indirectly, we need to make sure that they are fit for purpose, that they not only work like they say they do, we demonstrate it through series of testing. And in 2008, the International Society of Professional Engineering put out GAMP5, which was a scientific risk-based approach to validated computer systems. And, it says it in the title, risk-based. And that was supposedly the focus of CSA itself. Oh, we need to take a risk-based approach. But, it became this topic that everyone was discussing. You go on LinkedIn, which I'm rather active on, and there was a period of time where there was posts from all of these consulting firms that were latching onto this idea. And this was kind of interesting because it was, in my viewpoint, the first time that the consultants were driving the narrative rather than the regulatory bodies. And so in I think it was in September of 2022, the FDA put out a draft guidance on computer software assurance and what they expected it to be. And I'm reading through this and I'm going, well, that's exactly what's in GAMP5. Why do we need to change the name? Why do we, what's the purpose? And so it makes me wonder, well, what have people like myself and other companies, what have they really been doing all this time? And then I guess for those of you that are not familiar with validation, taking a risk-based approach means looking at the system and testing the system based upon the riskiest functions that system will execute. And there's three components: patient safety, product quality, data integrity. Data integrity is a whole other buzzword that's very important in the industry now. And obviously, computers generate a lot of data, so having data integrity is very important. But you focus on the riskiest functions of the system. You go through a systematic review of the system's requirements, which which basically state what the system does, and you risk them high, medium, and low. At Spark, we typically do not test low risk requirements because they have very little impact, if at all, on those three important key quality attributes: patient safety, product quality, and data integrity.
So would I be right in sort of discussing this from the idea of this was a best practice that has been in place for decades, that of course people should be doing it, and now it's become a requirement, and this is sort of the confusion why it's now being emphasized? Is that sort of where we are?
Well, I mean, it's always been a requirement, right? The FDA, there's several regulations the CFR 210, 211, specifically 211, requires that your systems be validated. There's the infamous 21 CFR Part 11, which is for electronic records and electronic signatures. That requires validation. And then there's the European Union Annex 11, which requires that your systems be validated. And computer systems validation was the way you did it. It was what was the terminology that you used. But my what I struggle with is, why do we need to change the acronym? What are we trying to prove? And I appreciate the guidance that's put out there, but GAMP5 has hundreds of pages on how you should complete a risk-based validation of a computerized system. And it's helpful, but I in some ways I wonder, are people getting confused? Because there are some elements of CSA that are, in my opinion, they're controversial. And when the draft guidance was put out, Spark made comments on it. I got my leadership team together and we reviewed the guidance, and one that really is a bit concerning for me is what they refer to as unscripted testing. And that is where the tester has no prescribed steps to execute. They basically are knowledgeable of the system, and they have a requirement that they need to prove. They just go and they just start writing down what they did. Typically, we have this saying in the regulated industry: if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen, right? And that you have pre-approved sequence of events that you're going to execute in a system to demonstrate that you have fully met a requirement, right? So there was, like, I can see where people are going to think, well, unscripted testing, well, that means I don't have to do anything at all, right? It's just I don't have to document it. But I think that's an area of concern for me, like that it could be, I'll just say, misused, right? Or misdirected.
And in a situation where we're talking about taking a risk-based approach to things, what is riskier than, like, well, so-and-so knows how the equipment works, we'll just let them test it without documenting what they're doing.
Right.
It puts a lot of question marks in my mind.
Yeah, I'm going to say this on the record, that unscripted testing does not mean undocumented testing. And it's not one of those situations where, there's the person just says, yep, I tested it, it's all good. There is some form of documentation, like, right, they have like maybe it's a standard form, and they write down what they did, and that's what they use as documentation. But I'll say this, is that the way that we approach at Spark the testing, things that, if we were, let's just say we were following CSA guidance, and we were doing unscripted testing, we would have those already classified as low risk, and we wouldn't be testing them explicitly. And what I mean by that is that just by using a system, you pretty much exercise a lot of those low risk functionalities, right? Just by going through the motions, right? But we don't explicitly state in the script that we're testing those requirements. They are tested just through doing the
normal course of operations. Yeah,
exactly. Thank you. Yes.
So yeah, no worries. I wonder if we could look at this maybe from the perspective of, quality culture. There's always a risk in places of familiarity breeding complacency. So perhaps putting a new label on things and offering a new set of guidelines is an opportunity for some organizations to make sure that they are still doing everything the way that it should be done.
Right.
In that context, do you have advice for some of the people who may be listening to this episode and saying, I hadn't really turned the screws on my system in a little while. If I wanted to go back and validate and make sure that I am CSA compliant and that I'm still following all the best practices, what should they be keeping an eye out for? Opportunities where they may have let things go a little lax. What are some of your thoughts there?
I think that the first thing that you should do, if you're concerned that the validation that you're doing today is not in alignment with these new CSA guidance that we have from the FDA, my suggestion is that you go back to your program and you review it against that. And if you are in the habit of just testing everything because and you're anxious and you don't have a good feeling about not testing things, because I'm by nature a person who is in validation. They want to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that everything works the way it's supposed to work. But if you do that, you end up spending more time implementing a system, and you waste money by testing things that really have just a low impact on the big three: patient safety, product quality, and data integrity.
So there is almost a risk of generating busy work rather than productive work.
Oh, definitely, definitely. It's and I'm reading the book by Simon Sinek right now. Start with why, right? And there's a quote in there is that you can make a decision on 30% of the required information, and you can make the right decision. And I look at a risk-based approach in the same way, right? Is that by systematically looking at the system, from a risk perspective, you can, without a doubt, demonstrate that the system is fit for purpose, and not bothering with these other, low-risk items. And you can save yourself time. You definitely generate a lot less paperwork, and you will end up with I would say, a more robust system.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the future of all this, because if the FDA was, making suggestions and asking for input in 2022, where are we now? What is going to be expected of people in qualification? What guidance do you have for people about where this is all going?
Sure. I know that the conversation around CSA has seemed to have cooled off a bit. I don't hear as much discussion about it. That's not to say it's gone away completely. We're waiting for the FDA to provide us with their final guidance on this. But in my mind, if you are following a risk-based approach that GAMP5 prescribes, then you are going to be, I'm going to say, 95% compliant with the guidance that the FDA ultimately provides on CSA. So, use a risk-based approach, do what you say you're going to do, and you will be in good stead with the regulatory agencies.
I think that is a great place to wrap things up. John, I really appreciate you giving us such a thorough and complete picture of what is happening in a topic I admit I didn't know a ton about at the start of this conversation, but I feel well equipped to have a conversation with QA/QC people moving forward, and I can only imagine how many actual technical experts watching this episode are saying something of the same. So I really appreciate your time. This has been great.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint Podcast Series. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.